So, Alaric Overbey, director at GreensideUp Farm, thank you so much for joining me on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that invitation.
So, we met at Indoor AgCon and we got a lot of attention there because you were hosting as well. So, I'm wondering if that was your first Indoor AgCon conference?
So it wasn't my
Okay.
first. It was actually this was my second
Okay.
conference. The first one I was the first time it was in Las Vegas, I think 2019, and I was on a panel
Okay.
then.
And what was your take this year? Did you notice any difference than when you attended last time?
The amount of people that
Yeah.
were there, and I think that the crowd was a lot more diverse.
Okay. And how did the panel get organized? I had a brief chat with Mary Catherine, who was on the panel with you as well. And to be honest, that was like one of the highlights. I was talking to her about that, the panel, and it was almost like the last panel of the last day, but it was very well attended. And I think it talked specifically about the challenges people are facing on the ground. Because I don't know how many of the other sessions you attended, but obviously a lot of it is like the big companies, the big issues, and the big opportunities. And so I'm wondering what your take was and how the panel came to be organized.
So it actually started off on
Okay.
LinkedIn. Indoor Ag had posted something about the conference and about having people coming out and having a conversation. And I kind of responded with like, well, no, everybody's not in that
Okay.
conversation. So Kyle Barnett reached out to me. I had known Kyle for a
Okay.
few years, kind of online. He reached out to me. We did a podcast, and I had entered. I kind of like, hey, what do you think about doing, a food desert
Yeah.
panel? To really kind of, talk about, some of the true issues when it comes to food security and how vertical farming and CEA can address that specific problem. They ran it up to,
And so apparently, yeah, obviously they ran up the chain and they put it
yeah,
together. And Nona, who's been a previous guest on the podcast, Nona, yeah, she's done some great work with her company as well. And so I think it went really well. And I'm
yes.
wondering what the feedback was from folks that attended.
It was great. We still having very active conversations from the
Yeah.
conference. So we've been in steady communication with several of the companies that were there. We've established several partnerships out of that, and working on a couple of other partnerships out of that. So it was very beneficial to really have an opportunity to grab that level
Yeah.
of individuals in this industry and to be able to take them around to see, really what the industry I feel is designed to
Yeah.
address.
I was chatting with a friend of mine, Ali Daniali from Harvest. Sound like you're doing some
Oh
work with
yeah.
Ali as well.
Oh, yeah. That's my
Yeah.
guy right there. Yeah. I love
So
Ali.
let's rewind the clock back a little bit. Obviously, you didn't, I'm guessing you didn't start your career in indoor farming. It sounds like you had a couple different jobs leading up to it. So I'm wondering if you could give us a little of the maybe 60-second overview of how you made your way into this industry.
So I'm from California, the
Yeah.
Bay Area, and so I've been primarily working in the IT industry. So in the early 2000s, I was doing data center optimization and cloud and backup
Yeah.
recovery. So I was also a solution specialist for like large IT companies, helping them transition from like Excel into
Okay.
CRM systems and introducing them to cloud and backup systems as opposed to like tape and backup. In 2015, moved to Dallas, working for a company, Rackspace. I had a coworker who lived in
Mm-hmm.
South Dallas, and I drove her home one day. I was living in like the Galleria area, and I drove her home one day, man, and it was like going when I crossed the bridge at Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. It was like the whole world changed
Yeah.
over there. There were no stores, a lot of homeless, just a lot of people just on the corners, and even though I'm from neighborhood or whatever, but in California, it was just very
Yeah.
different. I still, I grew up with my grandmother who had a garden in her backyard. I could walk down the street to my neighbors. There was always peaches and plums and kumquats and different stuff. So there was just really, I never really even had a real understanding or relationship with the food
Mm.
desert. So really going out there and seeing, a food desert and then really wanted to kind of do research on the cause of those things. And so I just started doing a lot of research on food security, what happens to these communities, how it happens in these communities, and then what's being done to fix these
Yeah.
communities. And in 2015, there was just no activity. There was no action. There was a city begging for other stores to come into these communities to try to solve the
Yeah.
problem. And they weren't getting a lot of buyers. At the same time, I was introduced to vertical
Okay.
farming through
Yeah.
tower gardens. So I had a coworker who was a part of Juice Plus in tower gardens. So that was my first introduction to vertical farming, and that's really kind of what pushed me into that industry, where I was basically combining what I learned in the IT industry with data center optimization and with vertical farming, and understanding that a food desert is about optimizing where food is
Hmm.
grown. And so that's how I kind of came up with, really focusing on these areas that are particularly marginalized, struggles with grocery
Yeah.
stores, struggles with, access to produce and things like that. So I took it from a very educational perspective, saying that, hey, if you start to educate, start to train these communities on this new technology, they'll eventually start to develop their own solutions for how to fix their own
Yeah.
problems.
And how much progress did you make while you were still in Dallas? And can you talk a little bit about any of the initiatives you were able to put in place there?
So in Dallas, 2015, they actually had ordinances out there that you couldn't grow food in your backyard or your front yard. I mean, there was an ordinance
Wow.
against it, and you couldn't grow food at your yard or your home and then resell it at a farmer's market or anything like that.
Wow.
Come to find out, this was almost a standard around the
Yeah.
country around that time. And so a lot of the municipalities then started in early 2015 through the USDA programs. They started opening up urban garden
Okay.
spaces, urban farming spaces. And so they started. But what you had was, because there was no structure to it, you had an influx of everybody now want to jump in and do community
Yeah.
gardens. So yeah, now you just had ridiculous community gardens popping up at schools and neighborhoods, on every vacant lot that you could find. And in Dallas, you had these communities now, people in these communities fighting over this same little pool of
Uh,
money that was now being offered for
yeah.
urban farming. And so, but there was no real communication in between. It was like, hey, I want to do this. There was no
Yeah.
system to it. What we did is we took advantage of the fact that they came out with that, and I focused on the vertical farming side. So me and my business partners, we basically quit our jobs at
Mm.
Rackspace. We got us a two-story loft in downtown Dallas in Deep Ellum. We moved in together, and we started growing on the rooftop.
Okay.
So we wind up setting up one of the first rooftop vertical farms in
Okay.
Texas, and working directly with the schools. When me and my partners separated, I actually stayed in Deep Ellum, and I got another location down the street where I had about a 4,000 square foot building storefront where I was doing both vertical farming, I was curating art, and then I also had a yoga
Okay.
studio. And so I had all this in
Mhm.
one. And it was really just kind of, 2015, there was just not a lot of people in this
Yeah.
space. And it was almost, there's probably no black folks in the
Yeah.
space at all, during that time. And so kind of being in Deep Ellum, just really kind of just making connections. And we hosted different types of events. I used to be doing down there. I used to do the wine walk. I used to do salad
Okay.
parties, different things where people came in, cut off the towers, had a salad, had a
Okay.
wine. So it was really, and then combining that with the yoga and the
Yeah.
health and all of those different things. But again, it was just a little too much too
Sure.
soon. So it was a challenge with, developing a workforce and training and really kind of getting it to a commercial level where it was actually viable. So I wound up moving to
Hmm.
Las Vegas after
Okay.
that. But I just seen that Las Vegas was a food desert
Yeah.
within a desert.
Yeah.
I was like, well, shoot, if anybody got a problem with food, Las Vegas do. So let me go on over here to Las Vegas and pitch the same thing
Okay.
out here. And so that's how I wound up getting in Las Vegas in 2017, 2018.
When you arrived in Las Vegas, having had the experience of what happened in Dallas and what you learned there, were you clear that that was going to be the next step for you, and that you still felt that this model was viable, that vertical farming was the future, and this is something that you wanted to continue doing? Yeah.
Absolutely. Coming to Vegas, it was even harder than being in
Mm.
Dallas because, so at least in Dallas, there was some type of muscle
Mm.
memory when it comes to
Oh,
agriculture.
okay. Yeah.
So you have to think, Dallas, in those southern states, there's a history of
Yeah.
farming and agriculture. There's land. So you have people who had, farmland in their families for
Yeah.
hundreds of years. They just didn't want to do no farming no more. Coming to Las Vegas, this was a place where there is no history of agriculture like
Yeah.
whatsoever in southern Nevada. There's no history of any type of commercial farming as far as food. They do grain and cows and stuff like that. But when it comes to growing their own food, there is no
Hmm.
history of it. So even the people who were coming here from other states, that generational gap between farming and
Yeah.
today was so big that, you kind of had to start from
Sure.
scratch, and you couldn't start from scratch in the dirt. So you have to start from scratch
Indoors.
vertical,
Yeah.
indoors. And So, I pedaled around, what I'm saying, like an old salesman, what I'm saying, selling like, if I was a used car salesman, I'm walking around with a tower on my back, pretty much, and going to different locations and restaurants and hotels and sitting, speaking at the city, like, hey, you guys might want to look at vertical
Hmm.
farming. It's
Yeah.
coming, and this was
Yeah.
2018. So I got some towers in some different places. I met up with my business partner who had a nonprofit called Youth Outdoor Unity, who was already working in some of the schools. And so I introduced the vertical farming to him. And we started putting these around in the schools and stuff like that, getting attention. But still, it was a very slow moving
Yeah.
process. And then at the same time, you had companies like Urban Seed and Oasis
Okay.
Biotech, who had just popped out here. And Urban Seed and Oasis Biotech were huge
Yeah.
failures, you know. And so it left a bad taste in it kind of left a bad taste in
For
people's mouth.
folks that may
And
not
so they
know
were
about those companies, and to whatever extent you know anything that may have happened, if you had to kind of look back and see what were they trying to do, and in your opinion, why do you think they did not succeed?
there was a lot of hype going around in the industry around this time, 2017 for
Yeah,
vertical
of
farming.
course.
It was hip, it was a new thing. So, it was taking community gardens to the next
Yeah.
level, but trying to apply an economic model to it. And then trying to, but they were targeting the strip. So they're targeting,
Yeah.
casinos and, high end. So early in this stage, the price point and the operational costs were ridiculous at
Yeah.
this time. So they couldn't get under $16 for a head of lettuce. So that gives you a very small market
Yeah.
to
That's some
operate
fancy
in.
lettuce.
Yeah, and but my guy Jim, one of the things they came out and said is that the reason that we're here is because Las Vegas can afford our
Yeah.
price
Yeah. Yeah.
points. The strip can afford our
Yeah.
price points. But that didn't really turn out to be that case. You look at the large operational costs of that and then a lot of the logistical issues that kind of went into that. That's what they were running
Hmm.
into.
Yeah.
Workforce, not able to get a viable workforce because again, this is a very new
Yeah.
industry. So it's not something that you go to
Yeah.
school for. And then nobody had created any ITT technical institutes for people to go to school
Sure.
for real quick so you can get in the industry, you know. So that was the biggest thing. So now what you're doing is that you're asking for regular wage workers to come in and do kind of like some high tech ag
Hmm.
work, but they're not trained enough to be able to do it. And you're not training them to basically pay them enough to be
Okay.
able to do it. And so those were some of the problems with both of those companies. Oasis Biotech, was at one point in time the largest vertical farm in the
Well.
country, and it was a matter of them kind of being too big too
Yeah.
fast. You know, and one of the other things with a lot of these organizations, I think that they miss some of the other fruits of indoor ag that it can, some of the other locations and spaces that have a lot of different opportunities that because of the capital investment, what I'm saying, and the investors in these organizations, they're basically pushed to get a quick
Yeah.
return,
Definitely.
you know, and so that's what they focus on. So it's not about really solving a problem or what the community might need and how this might be able to serve, saying a larger, problem. It was about how do we immediately fix the fact that, hey, there's a demand for produce. Everybody's on this organic thing, and and now Monsanto's in, so everybody's trying to fight against, an alternative to what Monsanto's doing. So it was all knee jerk
Yeah.
reaction, in the industry, real quick. Like, ooh, let's build these things real quick and let's get them out
Yeah.
there real quick. My mindset on all of that was, in learning that was that, you're trying to fight a big war with a big army, so it's going to take a lot of big resources in order to
Yeah.
pull that off and a lot more
Yeah.
time. So I kind of came in with a more of a art of war mentality, you know, of basically developing multiple micro
Hmm.
farms that were basically strategically placed close to where that demand
Yeah. That
was.
makes sense.
And so that's always been my model, like basically keeping it small, keeping it manageable, a small workforce that you can easily be deployed or redeployed or moved. And, saying, so it made them, I think it would make the industry a lot more agile.
So the current project is GreensideUp Farm, and then there's also Vertical Life Farms. Are those two different organizations?
Same
Okay.
organization. So those are my
Yeah.
evolutions, so, how I've evolved. So I started off with Dallas
Yeah.
Urban Farms in Las Vegas, in Dallas. And then when I split from them, I've been operating Vertical Life Farm. And then I had a nonprofit called The Farm, which is the farm is food access and
Okay.
reclamation model. So like that's the core of basically reclaiming the food industry.
Talk a little bit about that idea. Like, what made you come up with that, and what did you get accomplished with that initiative?
For a lot of these communities, it's really starting off with the
Yeah.
education, understanding what food access is, and then how do you start to
Mm,
reclaim that and developing a model around that. So it's not just saying, hey, you put a farm over here, you put a grocery store over here, and this food desert is going to fix
sure.
the problem. And that's what a lot of people think from the outside looking in. Oh, they just need more
Yeah.
grocery stores. That'll fix it. Oh, they just need a farm over there.
Mm,
That'll fix it. Not understanding that, that these problems didn't happen
yeah.
overnight. You know, that's the thing. So they're not going to fix overnight. It's not going to take a one time fix all,
Yeah.
solution. It's the same thing where if it took 10 years to solve this problem, it's going to take 20 years to
Hmm.
fix this problem. And it's easier done taking this in small chunks where you look at first the training and education and really doing community development and community
Yeah.
involvement, to really introduce the community to a whole different way of eating and
Yeah.
feeding themselves.
Yeah.
So, because a lot of these communities have been trained to eat a
Sure.
certain way. There's certain behavior patterns, there's certain buying habits. All of those different little demographic issues go into really kind of solving that. And the industry itself hasn't looked at
Hmm.
that. Why? Because it's not the industry's problem.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a problem being hungry, if you don't have a problem with a food desert, if you don't have a problem being food insecure, then
Out
your
of sight, out of
solution isn't going to
mind.
be
Yeah.
designed right, right. So your solution isn't designed to solve
Yeah.
that problem, although it has the ability to, easier, what I'm saying, and with less money than it does to want to tackle this whole, global hunger and the year 2050, and and we're going to need a land mass the size of, South America. That song is kind of,
Yeah. It's on
it's a
repeat.
mantra that's out there now. Yeah, so that's the
Yeah.
mantra out there. So everybody hops on that mantra. But when it comes to like really looking at, look how much money you have reached. Look how much money you've gotten in
Yeah.
this industry over the last, 5 to
Sure.
10 years. It's been a ridiculous amount of money that's been poured into
Yeah.
this industry, you know, and with almost zero return on investment.
For a lot of them, yeah.
And they're okay with that. And for us, I always looked at it like, man, man, you do 10 million, for this company. I could have did 10 $1 million
Yeah.
farms
Yeah.
and had a much larger impact. And so that's really the perspective that we kind of look at it from, is that, it's really like, how do you start to allocate those resources? How do you start to allocate funds? And what is the actual objective? Is the objective to actually solve a problem, or is it just to make money?
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to touch a little bit about this idea of almost like not knowing any better. And for a lot of these communities, for people that grew up in food deserts, I grew up in just outside New York City, and after New York City. And so, I'm familiar with like the bodega at the corner, and just like,
Yeah,
how you
yeah,
go in there and you basically you're not going in there for like the freshest produce and stuff. And at least there you have some access to some of it. But it's also like, if you're not educated on nutrition, if you're not educated on the value of fresh produce and nutrients and all this stuff, like it literally starts at the home, and where, what you were given access to growing up. Like, I mean, the human body is very resilient, because I've made it through many Happy Meals and Lucky Charms. And so the body can survive,
yeah,
but that's not necessarily, we're not getting, nutrition. We're getting what the marketers have strategically placed in the shelves at the cheapest price point. One of the things that stood out for me when
right.
we took a tour of one of the groceries in Las Vegas was a blue Sunkist. I didn't even know they made blue Sunkist. It was like, come on, like, is this like the best? And when you think about the irony that the brand name is called Sunkist, like, oh, you get this vision of like
Yeah,
these oranges and like in Florida and stuff. It's a
yeah.
blue carbonated drink. I was like,
So
yeah,
far from it.
very far
Yeah,
from it. So talk a little bit about, like, in our neighborhoods. I'm Latino myself, and just, thankfully had more, as much as I was the American way in terms of the food when I was growing up as well. Thankfully, I had still some of my cultural food, my rice and beans, and like the
absolutely,
appreciation
absolutely.
for that. But can you talk about the importance of how, like you said, you could drop the fresh produce in the neighborhood, and you can create the relationship between the market. But if the people that walk in there on a day-to-day basis don't see that as important in their own lives, that's really where it starts.
Yes, absolutely. So like when we took the trip over to Mario's, either one of the grocery stores, One thing you didn't see in there, and this is the fastest moving product in grocery stores across the country, is packaged salads. Neither one of these locations
Yeah,
carry
yeah.
those things. Because again, it kind of goes back to, like you said, about access and habits, cultural reference. You know, one thing that, especially out here, that you notice about, the Hispanic community is that there's still a very close connection to its culture.
Yes.
The culture itself and the food itself is primarily vegetables are used to season everything in
Yeah.
Hispanic dishes. For African Americans, for example, it's been a little different. So, there's this habit, soul
Yeah.
food. Soul food is the staple, what I'm saying, of that barbecue and
Mm-hmm.
ribs and collard greens and mustard greens that you cook for three
Yeah.
hours. So by the time you eat them, they ain't got no
Yeah.
nutritional
Yeah. Yeah.
value left. So that habit, and that's the muscle memory when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
food. So that's when I was saying about about the educational piece. That's why, like, even what we do, that we're probably the only company I ever seen really doing like collard greens on
Yeah.
vertical
Yeah. Yeah.
farms, and we don't let them grow so big, for example, because they don't understand that, we think that big is better, but the reason that they let them grow so big is because you had so many people they had to feed with just, one
Sure.
plant,
Sure.
for example. So let me let this plant get as big as it can, and I could chop it up and I could feed
Sure.
several people, now with this big
Yeah.
collard green. But what that does is that, you start to add in more salt, you add in
Mm.
oils, you add in fats, you add in all these things that now take whatever little nutritional value is left in
Yeah.
that plant is now completely
Yeah.
smoked
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
And so that's created health
Mm-hmm.
issues in these
Yeah. Of
communities.
course.
And that's one of the things I discovered in Dallas, man, when I started doing the research on the amount of diabetes, fibromyalgia, just all the different diseases and ailments, mental issues, and everything that was related to food and what they're putting in their body and what they have access to putting in their body, and the habit of taking what they have access to and even making it worse than what it is
Yeah.
normally, and making it even worse and then ingesting that into your body. They had the highest rate of amputees from
Wow.
diabetes in Dallas.
Wow.
So now I'm looking at this from a very community, overall, a high level community vision
Yeah.
now. Now I'm saying, okay, you have this community, they don't got no good food. They have, they're already sick from the food that they've
Yeah.
been eating. Now they're being hobbled. They don't even have the means, physically to get up and do anything different now. Now they're completely dependent on the system. And, and then the mortality rate is
Yeah.
extremely high. So they're eating to die as opposed to eating to live. And that's what I started to see in these communities. And I'm like, there's no way you can change that until they change what they're eating. Because now you're past diabetes, for example. These numbers in diabetes was already ridiculous. But now you got genetically passed down, childhood
Yeah.
diabetes, which that term itself doesn't make sense, because diabetes is something that you get from eating a certain way over a certain period of time, and your body saying, you didn't mess me up. So now you have kids being born with that. Now that's a ridiculous
Yeah.
problem. Now it's a mortality problem. It's like, hey, now you're saying, if you start to look at that on a timeline, you really start to look at that for a community, like that community is dying, like
Yeah.
literally. And so that's been my focus. Like, you got to come in and you got to do something different.
Yeah.
And so coming in and doing something different and taking it from the education to the economic. Like, you can't get one without, you can't do it without making it economic for the people in the community.
So talk a little bit about, Alaric, about how the origins of Greenside Up Farms and also the partners that you're working with now, and what the organization looks like.
So Greenside Up was a combination of seeds that I planted out here in Las Vegas previously with my business partner who was running a nonprofit called Youth Outdoor Unity. And then the experience that I picked up in Oklahoma over the last 3 years operating focused urban
Okay.
farms. So one of the things out here that happened in Vegas with me was, and I reached out to a guy out in Oklahoma City, northeast Oklahoma, who had just shut down a large grocery store, making it the 10th largest food desert in the country. And so he was getting ready to build another grocery store. I reached out to him on LinkedIn, like, hey, I got an idea for you. Instead of just building another grocery store, how about we install a vertical
Yeah.
farm in there? He liked the idea. Flew me out there to Oklahoma. We had some conversations with him and his wife. They had a chain of grocery stores. They actually built 2 grocery stores from the ground up that were like state-of-the-art grocery stores with thermodynamic heating
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
type of stuff. It was just bad grocery store. And so they were in the process of designing a new grocery store. And I introduced this to them where it's like, hey, it's not about just even growing the food, but I want to come in and I want to be able to train the community on this type of agriculture, this type of farming. This food will now go directly on the shelves in the store. So, for you as a grocery store, I'm helping you as far as on a lot of your logistical issues when it comes to sourcing and waste and
Yeah.
all of that. That just to help eliminate that. At the same time, it's giving you the opportunity to introduce a better quality of produce than your competitors are basically offering at Whole Foods and
Yep.
Sprouts in this particular
Yeah.
community. So now what that also does is that's like, hey, all these people who were previously going over there to Whole Foods and Sprouts, I'm like, you guys over there are growing better produce at a better price. I'm finna go over there and
Yeah.
get that. So now you're creating more economics in that community by bringing outside money
Sure.
in. So that was the model. Unfortunately, the owners came down with Lyme
Oh no.
disease. Yeah, so got real sick, project stalled, and they wound up selling all their grocery stores. So I wound up doing like, instead of just picking up and leaving, which is what I wanted to do, I was already kind of invested in the
Okay.
community. So I was
Yeah.
already there, so I was still, wanting to say, hey, let's grow some food. So I actually wound up buying and picking up a 5-acre farm out there where I had a regular farm, like in the soil.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It was an organic farm, and it was already an operating farm. They just didn't have the manpower, the people to operate it. But it was 5 acres. It had 9 30 by 100 high tunnel hoop
Okay.
houses on it. A field of strawberries, okra patches, a little bit of everything. So that gave me an opportunity to really kind of understand farming from two aspects. I didn't have any experience, with that type
Yeah.
of agriculture, so it was, but I needed to understand both the soil aspect, the challenges of farming
Yeah.
that way, whether it's being in the soil or being in the greenhouse, the amount of manpower it took, what I'm saying, to really
Hmm.
operate that. And it was ridiculous. It was
And
ridiculous,
also the dependency on the environment, right, and the conditions.
Yes. Oh yeah. And so being in Oklahoma, I had
True.
ice freezes and snow and just I lost whole crops and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And it's like, I didn't just lose them. I got to go clean that stuff and pull it
Yeah.
all up and then redo the soil and all. So it was
Yeah.
grueling. you know, I had 3 of the houses that were just all indeterminate tomatoes. And I couldn't walk 50 feet in there without picking 50
Wow.
pounds. So I needed a lot of
Yeah.
people to be able to pull that off. So that gave me a good understanding of the labor intensity that it took for operating
Sure.
a farm. And so having that knowledge base and then combining that knowledge base with understanding, the controlled environment in the vertical farm industry allowed me to kind of come back out here because now Vegas was
Yeah.
right. Now, for the last 2 years, that's all they've been talking about out here is vertical
Yeah.
farming. And, now they want to hop on this whole vertical farming thing, but they had no idea how to
Yeah.
do it.
Nothing like a
So
pandemic to shake things up, right?
yeah, exactly. So coming out of that, their whole mentality changed because now it's like, hey, you guys import 98% of all your produce. You got the fire marshal saying that, hey, if I-15 shut down, Las Vegas will have 3 days worth of food
Wow.
left. So now again, it's that knee-jerk reaction
Sure.
to a
Sure.
problem. And so now these ideas pop up. Oh, let's drop a shipping container over here. No
Yeah.
workforce, no understanding of heat loads and environmental factors. So it's like, yeah, we can just drop it over here to work and we just flip
Yeah.
a switch. And that's what they've been looking for. But that's not what
Yeah.
happens. So that's kind of where they're at. So I got involved with some of the projects out here that's been initiated by the city of Las Vegas, city of North Las Vegas, and a lot of these different
Hmm.
nonprofits when it comes to strictly focus on these food
Yeah.
areas. And then the fact that the USDA and ARPA Monday got a lot of funding that they did have to do
Hmm.
something with in this area. So I got on the committee to kind of be a sounding board to kind of listen through and kind of help guide through some of the process. And so that's kind of what we've been doing out here now. It's really kind of helping with the city with our initiative and really kind of get the city to kind of focus on what we're doing on the grassroots
Okay.
level. Because initially, a lot of the stuff is being initiated out here not by the people in the community, but by the
Yeah. Of
businesses.
course.
So the 2 shipping containers that you've
Yeah.
seen over there, who paid for those? MGM.
Mm.
So MGM bought those shipping containers and put them over there because they wanted access to that
Sure.
produce. So again, that talks about that's where that
Yeah.
demand is.
How's that
If they're
project
willing
work?
to put that type of
You want to
money
talk a
in
little
there.
bit about, for the benefit of the listener, those containers you're referring to, a little bit about what that program's about?
So what they did over there, there's an area that's called the historic west side of
Okay.
Las Vegas. And this is actually where a lot of Las Vegas
Hmm.
started. But also during the 60s, it was also legalized
Yeah.
segregation. So when you start to have people like, Etta James and Sammy Davis Jr., part of the Rat Pack, they could perform on the Las Vegas side inside the casinos. But as soon as they were done, they had to go back to the other side of the
Yeah.
tracks. They had to go back to West Las Vegas, where, you didn't have the same housing and everything like that. But what wound up happening is that side of town kind of developed its own Las
Yeah.
Vegas. So that's where you had like the first, integrated, casino, which was the
Okay.
Moulin Rouge. That's where that
Okay.
started off at. Sammy Davis had boarding houses over there, and other artists used to go over there. So it was a bustling, thriving area at one point
Yeah.
in time. Then people just started moving
Yeah.
away. What happens in these areas? Other businesses come in around. So there's been this 100-year plan about revitalizing that area because now it's an eyesore for the
Yeah.
state. I mean, it's one of the worst, kind of areas, what I'm saying, and to be buttoned up right against the
Yeah.
strip, like a stone's throw. It's like, hey, we might need to start to work on that problem over here a little
Yeah.
bit now. So they have this whole plan, starting off with James Gate Park and J Street and some of those other areas where they're looking at how to start to revitalize them. The James Gate Park was a small strip. It's about 5 miles on the side of the fifth, right next to the freeway. They shut the park down probably 5 years ago because it just got overran by
Mm.
homeless and
Yeah.
crime. So they wind up gating up the park. That's why there's a big gate around the park. Nobody can go to
Yeah.
the park. So their plan was or is to develop that into almost a farming corridor. So the two shipping containers was the first
Yeah.
installation. The second installation is supposed to be a cooperative grocery store. And then the third installation is supposed to be a 3-story multi-use vertical farm through vertical harvest. So by
Oh
no,
yeah. Okay.
so that's been the plan. How that works and where that's going is
Yeah.
a challenge, and it's a challenge. And so we're trying to help the city kind of work through those challenges by again being very kind of grassroots and kind of looking at how do you do this where you incorporate more of the community into that development where it doesn't feel like it's
Sure.
gentrification.
Yeah, that makes sense. So talk a little bit about present day and the work that GreensideUp Farm is doing and what the current plans and the roadmap looks like.
So one of the things we wanted to bring out of that conference, and one of the reasons for that tour, was that I had this idea of everybody knows, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, and it has kind of a negative
Sure.
connotation now,
Yeah. Yeah.
But I looked at that as saying, hey, here's an opportunity for the industry to actually sit down somewhere for a minute and actually solve
Yeah.
a problem. Bring your resources. If we was able to bring, because we're all in this together, so if we was able to bring just a little bit of our resources together to look at, hey, how do we address
Mm-hmm.
this problem? How do we collect the data on addressing
Yeah.
this problem? If we had the data and the information on addressing an actual problem, we could then, you can
Yeah.
scale that. You can apply that to other you can apply that to other areas, other scenarios, because now you have an actual working model. And I don't think there's one system that
Yeah.
fits all. I think it's a combination of utilizing all of these systems and really using that to address the issue of access to
Mm-hmm.
food, because there's a very economic aspect of that a lot of them is missed. And so what we've done is looked at first developing almost a micro scale micro farm model, and then alongside that we're developing the workforce development and education model along with it. And alongside of that, we're attaching the community development
Yeah.
model, where it's educating the community on what's coming, what's happening, educating the community on some of the health things. So we work with a lot of we've made very strategic partnerships, both on in the food
Yeah.
industry. So we're here at the Culinary Academy that's right across the street from us. Nevada Partners is a workforce development STEM
Mm-hmm.
center, a community development organization.
Which we
And
got a
then what
tour of during that as well. Yeah.
yeah. So they offer a lot of different programs in here. So everything from housing to jobs to health. And so that allowed us to kind of put ourselves in a position where we can actually display what healthy food means to
Yeah.
the community from a very community standard, from a community output
Sure.
area. So they're already doing the output. And so all we did is included the fact that their whole conversation when it comes to the health problems and everything like that is all focused on food
Yeah.
security. And so my whole thing is like, hey, that's nice and all, but at some point you have to start to have the conversation about securing the food.
Mm.
So that's kind of where we're at now. We're saying, hey, food security, you've already
Yeah.
identified the problem. We can have a conversation about the problem over and over and
Sure.
over again. So now let's take a piece of that and say that, hey, here is over here. Now we want to start talking about how do you start to secure the food to be able to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Because now once you have, it's like, I don't know, it's like on one side you have, COVID, right? Which is the
Yeah.
food problem. And then over here you have, Pfizer. And so here is the solution. Here's the inoculation. Here's your booster shot for your
Yeah.
problem over here. You know what I'm saying? You just have to now have access to it and market it properly and say, this is why you need to get this shot. This is why you need to get this food. This is why when you're talking about, women, infant, and children and maternal issues when it comes to food security and WIC, the biggest part of that program is how do you get healthy food to those
Sure.
young, to the
Yeah.
kids? How do you create more access
Yeah.
to that? How do you start to eliminate a lot of those barriers? For example, and a lot of these programs are extremely
Yeah.
subsidized. And so the industry doesn't necessarily see that because again, it's not their problem. Here we see it like, we're part of a Nevada grant that they got that came from the USDA called the Local Feed Purchase Program, where, almost, $680 million have been poured into these states for them to do nothing but buy produce from local
Mm-hmm.
farmers. So Nevada has, 6 million or something like that to buy produce from
Yeah.
local farmers. So the whole point of that is to give some economic foundation to local farmers to say that, hey, you just grow it. We'll
Yeah.
buy it
Of
from you.
course.
So now you don't even have to go worry about chasing it down at the stores. Matter of fact, we won't just buy it from you. We'll pay you to grow it. We'll pay you to process it. We'll pay you to
Yeah.
store it. And we'll pay you to deliver it.
That's just like the type of boost that you need, especially for an environment that hasn't had that experience and is struggling to figure out a way to get this project off the ground and up and running, right? And sometimes those incentives are exactly what you need to let the bigger companies, the MGMs of the world, like figure out like how we partner with this. And if you really are, what all these casinos, Las Vegas is their lifeblood, and if they really believe that, it's almost like what gets grown in Vegas should be eaten in Vegas. Maybe that should be the new
Exactly.
logo. But it's also
Yeah.
like if you really
Yes.
believe and you're not only benefiting from all the folks that are coming in, but also give back and see how you can support the community. That's literally just all you have to do is look out of these windows when you're in these hotels and you don't have to look too far to see these communities. It's not like they're out of sight, out of mind. I think there's a lot
Right.
of work
Right.
that still needs to be involved from an education perspective. I'm wondering if you could see like where's the progress at now from an education perspective at the community level. I did see some students in the center when we were there and just kind of thinking about this as a trade or this as because it starts at the family level, right? And it's like, how
Yes.
do you
Absolutely.
educate them that nutrition is important, that fresh produce is important, and obviously sometimes it's the kids that educate their parents sometimes on what the future looks like. And I'm wondering how much progress you feel has been being made there.
There's some progress being done. We've been, again, from where we're at, just really kind of networking with both the school system, networking with juvenile facilities, and then directly what we're doing as far as like with Nevada partners. It's been a challenge in trying to get that into these systems where they because there's not a lot of people out there to
Yeah,
teach it.
yeah,
And so that's one of the challenges. And then, really kind of getting into the community and not just teaching it, but giving them an access to where to get it from. You can teach me about it, but then, I still have,
yeah,
transportation issues, when it comes to getting to the nearest grocery store, for example. So in that area, that grocery store is not frequented by the people. Like out of that whole community, they drive past that store to go to the Walmart that's almost 5 miles
mm,
away because they don't have enough of the resources. So it's not just the store, but it's the transportation, to get to the
sure,
store. It's the education on what to pick, what product, not just that, but how do you
yeah,
prepare
yeah,
something different? So a lot of them don't even know how to prepare. You give them some squash, they're gonna look at you like, okay, what I'm supposed to do with that? I give you some kale. These aren't kale
yeah.
communities. These aren't
These are
microgreen communities.
arugula
You know what I'm
communities.
saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, these aren't arugula communities, man. So it's like they don't. When you say, "Hey, this is what we're doing and this is what we're producing," and you putting that out there, it's like, okay, what they got to do with me? So again, that's where that education and having grassroots people going out there in the community. Like we took some collard greens we grew and we took them over there to Mario's and had his chef cook them. And then we did, a food sampling like they do at
That's great.
Costco.
I love that. Yeah.
And we was able to get these people to come through there and taste this and be like, oh, Mario didn't cook. These ain't Mario's greens. They're like, yeah, these ain't Mario. I haven't tasted greens like this since I was in Louisiana and I was 12 years old. So those are the responses. So then it's like, okay, so it is about access. If you give it to them, what I'm saying, it becomes something that's normal to them. That's the thing, is that unhealthy food is very normal in these communities now. So where you see Mario's at, as soon as you step out, you turn left and you got McDonald's, Jack in the Box, Starbucks, and Del Taco. You go across the street, you got Taco Bell, Panda Express. So it's like, okay, well, I just got more unhealthy options.
And they're cheaper too, which is, how do you compete against that? I think part of it is also just kind of thinking long term. So as we wrap up, thank you for sharing all your journey. It's been really interesting and inspiring. And I think it's going to be super helpful for our audience to hear all about it. And I'm wondering, you've talked a little bit about the challenges, but what has you hopeful? You're thinking out maybe just 12 months out. You've got projects in the works. You mentioned some work that you're doing with Ali as well, which is promising. Where are you seeing the most hope in terms of moving the needle forward and then getting to where this vision of where you think it can be?
So our biggest project right now is converting this grocery store into a vertical grocery farm. I mean, it's been a decrepit grocery store, in the community for almost 30 years. We've been fortunate to have owners that also see that. I mean, they own the store, but they also recognize that, hey, we're not part of this community. And so if we're not part, we don't know how to feed you guys. And they're being very candid about that. We don't know what your needs are. We don't know what your wants are. It's different, and so their willingness to let us come in and now take over that store gives us a very big platform to really change the dynamics of food deserts and food security by developing a model, a solution that you can plug and play this in any community, because it's not just about putting in a store. It's making that store very sustainable, but it's also an opportunity to train the community in an industry where it's not just a farm, but now it's the operation of an actual revenue generating business that they all take part in, that they're all participating in, that they all have a vested interest and ownership in, because now there's something that they built. And I think that's a perspective that hasn't been done in these communities. So there haven't been any real internal solutions. And the reason why there has been a lot of internal solutions, because they don't have a lot of outside knowledge. The ones in these communities, they don't what CEA is. They don't even know what that term. They don't even know what that term means. So they don't understand what controlled environment agriculture is. They don't know. They understand the difference between hydroponics and aquaponics and aeroponics, and hybrids of it. They don't understand that. But I look at it as like, I don't care if if I go to South America and I go to some pygmies in the jungle and I bring them a cell phone and I come back a year later, their ability to communicate and how they talk to me is going to be very different.
Yes,
right?
True.
I look at that being the same way in these communities. If you give them the tools and the knowledge, that it'll help them develop their own direction. So I think that's what they need. They don't need me or somebody else to come in and fix their problem. They need the tools and mechanisms to figure out how to fix their problems for themselves.
Yeah, teach a man to fish, right?
Teach a man to fish. Like, you might want to go get crappie. He might want to go get catfish. He might want to go shark fishing. But they all understand the benefit of a fishing pole now.
Yes. Yeah.
The size, it might be a different size. It might be a different weight. It might have a different lure on it. But they know how to apply that to whatever situation that they're in at that time, though. That's the difference.
And so with the initiatives you have in place, you feel hopeful that it'll be slow in the beginning. And to your point, this is new to a lot of folks and new to communities, new to generations. But, do you feel hopeful that you're on the right path?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That conference really opened our eyes up to the fact that, and it really opened the city's eyes up. I'm like, okay, hey, they might be on to something. If you have this many people interested in what they're talking about out of nowhere, then that might be something we might want to, kind of stand behind. And so that's where our conversations are right now, is that, we're going to do something out here that's going to force you to work with us. Because you're better off playing with us than playing. It's like, hey, we just going to do the right thing. And I think us being able to show that and show the activity that we're doing without anything from you, we haven't got any funding from
Yeah.
anybody. We've been doing this all grassroots, all from ourselves. Hopefully, our goal is to say that our work that we're doing will then give us the funding that we need to do it better and bigger.
So that's a great segue, because what I've been doing at the end of these conversations is leaving a few minutes for the guests, because of the audience, because it's folks, it's essentially all the founders, CEOs of vertical farming companies, your colleagues in the space, people who are interested in this industry, whether entering this industry or who have been like quote unquote veterans. I mean, it's still relatively new. So what message do you have? I mean, this is a platform I want to make available to you. Like, if you had a message for folks in the vertical farming, your peers in the space, any potential or future partners, floor is yours for that.
Come to Vegas. Taylor Swift, Usher, they all got residencies out here. So what we're doing is offering residency to the industry here in Las Vegas. I mean, this is the largest food desert in the country. And I think that this could be almost a mecca. We want to create an agri-tech valley, similar to Silicon Valley, where this is home to a lot of these large companies to start to deploy. We help with the training. We help with the sourcing. We help with getting your products out there and making people more aware of your products. We're not married to anything. We're not married to anybody. We're married to the technology, and we're married to the output of agriculture and good food. And that's where I think it gives, like most organizations, they all have this social initiative that they want to put. Let us be that social initiative. Let us be that 1% that you dedicate to solving a particular problem. We share that data. You take that back. Now you have more comprehensive data on how to address different issues that you're working on. But I think our value here is the fact that we're going to do the work. We're very active. We don't ask a lot of questions. We just feel that, hey, there's a need, there's a demand, and then there's a way to supply the demand. So it's just very simple, supply and demand. And then we also are working at, our thing is like, hey, we chase different money. We chase the money of people who don't normally have access, who you think don't have money, but really, these communities have $1 trillion buying power. So that's those things that we tap into. And so in order to really pull that off and really to make this CEA successful is about partnering, not just at the big level, but also at the little level. By supporting these smaller farms, both with your technology, with your knowledge, to make them more resilient, make them more viable, and really feed into actually participating in solving a solution.
Well, Alaric, I'm really grateful that we got connected. I'm so happy that you took the initiative to kind of speak up for the voices that are unheard, especially at the conference. Shout out to Suzanne, who's done a great job with the conference. I think they've doubled the size of it since last year. And just also for the organizers to be aware that this is something, and to recognize that this wasn't being addressed. And it's something that I'm glad they gave you the platform of the panel. And I think we're having this conversation because of it. And I'm sure there's been a ton of follow-up conversations because of it as well. So I applaud you for kind of being the boots on the ground and speaking up, for the unheard voices, right? Because we need more people like you that are doing that, because communities may not realize that there's a need there, or what the opportunities exist out there, like vertical farming, that can address a small part of the problem. And I think what you're doing is really admirable. Your journey put you at the right place at the right time with the right technology and the right experience, to kind of be the right person to spearhead this. So GreensideUp.farm for folks to get connected. We'll make sure we have your LinkedIn as well. Any other place you want to send folks to learn more or connect with you?
GreensideUp.farm. Also, one last tip: we're partnering up with Indoor Ag for next year's conference. So there'll be another tour. We want to try to make this an annual tour. But the goal with this tour is to be able to see what we've been able to accomplish in a year.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's Greenside Up Farm socials where people can see the progress as well, right? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So Instagram, Facebook, we're everywhere.
We'll list all those in the show notes. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.